The following movie has been rated PG-13 by the Motion Picture Association of America. Some material may be inappropriate for young children. Parents may wish to consider whether it should be viewed by those under 13.
My name is Eric Skwarczynski, and you're listening to episode number 12 of Gut Reactions. There seems to be a real stigma around PG-13 horror movies. Spend enough time around horror fans online or off, and the ability of a PG-13 movie to be scary, or even good, will be called into question. The common mindset appears to be that blood, boobs, and bad words are integral components of a great horror film. Now, some great horror films may have these components, but I don't necessarily think that's the cause of their greatness. If PG-13 is limited in these areas, can great, let alone good horror exist in that space? Well, upon review, the short answer I think is yes. Today I'll be talking about some great PG-13 films within the horror genre. But first, it's time for a quick update on what I've been watching lately. Now, if you've been listening to podcasts lately, you know that on episode 10 and 11, I was joined by the excellent hosts of Everything Trying to Kill You, which is a personal favorite podcast of mine, and we talked about Ed Gein and his cinematic influences there.
Ed Gein, Maitre d' Canal Bar?
No, serial killer, Wisconsin in the 50s.
In those episodes, I kind of cut out a lot of what I've been watching lately, so I have 2 weeks of movies that I was watching in the course of those 2 episodes being released. So there's a lot to catch up on here. I'm not going to get into all of it. I just want to give a brief summary for those that might be wondering. As you know, if you listened to the last episode, I watched Silence of the Lambs. If you want to hear my thoughts, go ahead and turn into episode number 11. I talk about that there. But after watching Silence of the Lambs, I proceeded to watch Hannibal and Red Dragon, which are the sequels to the film.
I've been in a state of hibernation.
I need some action, Clarice. I need to come out of retirement and return to public life.
Hannibal really didn't work for me after Silence of the Lambs. It's not by any stretch a bad movie, but it just doesn't fit the mood and the tone of Silence of the Lambs. Again, Anthony Hopkins is great. I think that Julianne Moore does a good job in the role of Clarice, but she's not Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster just crushed that role. And then Red Dragon was interesting as well.
I need your advice, Dr. Lecter.
I'm all ears.
It just fell really flat at times, and it felt like too much of a rehash of what worked in Silence of the Lambs, but just not done quite as effectively. I also watched Children of the Corn.
From the author of Carrie, The Shining, The Dead Zone, and Christine. An adult nightmare. Stephen King's Children of the Corn.
I don't know that it was a great movie, but it was definitely fun. It was weird seeing Linda Hamilton play kind of the cute girlfriend character when I'm used to her playing Sarah Connor. I kept waiting for her to kick butt, and then I realized that probably wasn't going to happen in this movie. But some really good visuals. The kid that plays Malachi is super creepy. All the kid actors were actually pretty good in this.
Just sit there, seize him, punish him, cut him down, I command you. I am the word and the giver of his laws. Disobedience to me is disobedience to him. Do it now, or your punishment shall be 1,000 times, 1,000 deaths, each more horrible than the last.
It does play kind of like a TV movie, but there's some really good moments in there as well. I also watched the remake of Carrie.
You pray, little girl. Pray for forgiveness.
Those of you that have been listening to the show since the beginning know that Brian De Palma's Carrie is one of my all-time favorite horror movies and one of my favorite movies of all time, period. So I was interested going into the remake. I was kind of disappointed that it was a pretty straightforward remake. It hits the same beats as the movie. There's a couple visual flourishes that are interesting. Julianne Moore is excellent as the mom. The character that plays the coach is really good as well. Honestly, the one thing I really didn't buy about the Carrie remake was Chloe Grace Moretz in the role of Carrie. Chloe Grace Moretz is such a pretty face and such a beautiful girl. I just didn't buy it. It's kind of the Andrew Garfield thing with Spider-Man. You don't buy that he's the outcast kind of loser. It's just really hard to buy into it. She does a good job in the role. I just didn't buy it the same way I did with Sissy Spacek, who is also beautiful, but she has that unique look where she can play, the homely girl, and then when she gets ready for the prom, you think, oh, she's a beautiful girl. She just wasn't ever allowed to express herself or, wear makeup or dress up. Yeah, the Carrie remake just ultimately felt pointless to me. Excessively needless is the way I described it when talking about it. But yeah, there's some cool visuals, some stuff with CGI that, I think was cool to see, but Brian De Palma's version is a masterpiece. I also watched Rosemary's Baby. Again, it was on the recommendation of the host of Everything Trying to Kill You, Mary Kay McBrayer, and Megan Stone Brooks. I enjoyed it. The first hour and a half is a masterpiece in my mind, but then once it actually gets into the, pretty obvious twist now, it just really fell apart for me. It just went into cheese fest. I also caught Alexandra Aja's first film, High Tension, that really put him on the map. I don't know if the movie worked for me. The first bit was masterful in my mind, very John Carpenter-esque, a little Wes Craven Last House on the Left going on. Once you find out the twist, a lot of people are really angry about it. I don't know how I feel about it. Looking back at the movie as a whole, without spoiling it, I understand how it could work, but then there's a lot of questions that it raises. I have to revisit it to see what I really think. And then lastly, I watched 2 movies. I watched The Possession.
Doctors, they can't help us, can they?
In the refuge of the Most High, I will trust in Him. Beneath His wings you will be protected. He will cover you.
Oh my God.
His truth.
Which was a Ghost House release. It was produced by Sam Raimi, directed by, and I know I'm going to say his name wrong, Ole Bornedal. It's a really interesting movie. It's basically an exorcism movie from a position of Jewish belief systems. So in the role that would usually be a priest, you have a rabbi, you have these Jewish demons, and it's Jewish iconography. It's a pretty interesting little film, and it's a good place to actually launch this discussion because it's a PG-13 movie. It really has all the elements a horror film needs. It's unflinching. It's got realistic characters that we truly care about. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is tremendous in this, as is Natasha Callis, who plays M, the possessed daughter. It takes existing familiar mythology and it really pushes it in like these new directions that we haven't typically seen by doing a spin on kind of the tropes we know. And then most importantly, it's scary. So it really works on a lot of levels. I think it might be my bloody good movie for this week, but I'm going to talk about one later on that might just unseat it. So before I talk about the other PG-13 movies that top the charts for me, I want to take a moment to listen to what you guys had to say. I posted a phone number in the Gut Reactions Facebook group and asked you guys to call in to talk about your favorite PG-13 movies, and you did not disappoint. So let's take a moment and listen to some of your calls.
Hey Eric, this is Aaron from Washington and the Feel and Film Podcast. My favorite PG-13 horror movie is easily The Exorcism of Emily Rose. This is like a part horror film, part courtroom drama, and it's a unique blend of genres that I've never seen done anywhere else. And the fact that these events were based on a true story just makes it even sadder. But it also amps up the scare factor quite a bit. It's not really filled with jump scares and gore, which I like, and it instead relies on a stellar performance by Jennifer Carpenter as the possessed Emily Rose, of course. She grimaces, she contorts her body, she really sells the tortured takeover of her character's physical body, and I think when you couple all of that with the intelligent writing on the courtroom side of the film, it gives the film two very distinct tones. You have the courtroom side and the horror side, and they never really come together. This battle here for her soul it's very compelling. It's very intriguing. I think the film features great performances across the board from Laura Linney and Tom Wilkinson as well. And frankly, it's just an awesome film that encourages viewers to consider possibilities that they might not necessarily believe in. And so it doesn't push a theology, but it definitely brings about thoughtfulness and conversation and reflection on what you do believe. So I love this movie. Until I saw The Exorcist, it was my favorite exorcism film of all time. Definitely still in my top 10 of all time. Exorcism of Emily Rose, best PG-13 horror movie.
Well, thank you so much for calling in, Aaron. I'm a huge fan of your podcast, the Feeling Film Podcast, and honored that you take the time to call in. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's a movie I watched that might unseat the possession as my bloody good movie choice, and that film is none other than The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
In a controversial decision, the Roman Catholic Church recognized the demonic possession of 19-year-old Emily Rose. Her exorcism was recorded. It played a crucial role in the events that followed.
Demons exist, whether you believe in them or not.
Sanctioned by church.
It has begun.
Challenged by law.
We are the ones who dwell within.
The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Rated PG-13. In theaters everywhere, September 9th.
I caught this movie after listening to your message, Aaron. It prompted me to finally watch it. It's been on my watch list for, man, I don't know how long. And I was not disappointed by it. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie. Laura Linney is fantastic in the movie. Tom Wilkinson is wonderful as the priest. The standout here, of course, is Jennifer Carpenter playing Emily Rose. Just such a strange, interesting performance in. And what I really appreciate about the movie is it doesn't rely heavily on strange effects. It's very much on her suffering and her personal reaction to what's going on. And I think it really works in that sense. I agree with everything you said about the courtroom drama being juxtaposed with this, brutal story of what happened to this girl. And again, from it being based on a true story, and I know I come from it from a Christian perspective. The director, Scott Derrickson, is a professing Christian as well. This is something where I do believe a lot of elements of the supernatural side that's presented in this movie. And so I think it's a movie that, whatever side you're looking at it from, it's a really interesting kind of introspective experience about what do I believe? What do I think? You find yourself wondering what explains what's happening to this girl. And I think it's good that the film doesn't go out of its way to necessarily show you a correct answer. I think it does lean that there is truth to it, but I think overall it allows you to kind of draw your own conclusion. I think the worldview that you watch the movie with is going to help determine what side of this you end up on. But yeah, really wonderful movie. Might be my pick for bloody good movie this week. It's funny because I've heard the argument that a lot of horror movies are Christian movies in disguise, and this movie I think really fits that bill. There's the atrocious Christian film that came out recently called God's Not Dead. God's not dead, he's surely alive. And I think the mistake that movie makes is it's so preachy about what its message is, and you have Christian versus bad guy, believer versus non-believer.
So let's look at theoretical physicist and Nobel Prize winner Steven Weinberg's description of what the Big Bang would have looked like. And since he's an atheist, we can be sure there isn't any believer bias.
And I like in this movie that they give you the internal conflict in Laura Linney's character where she's a agnostic defending an ardent believer, this priest, and then you have a man who professes to be a Christian prosecuting the priest. And it's a very interesting dynamic there where you have, her wrestling internally with all these concepts and then trying to, at the same time, do her job of, defending this priest to the jury when she's not really sure where she stands on everything. It's a really interesting film. All right, our next call was from Richard Foltz of Popcorn Theology.
Hey, Eric. This is Richard Foltz from Popcorn Theology Podcast, available on iTunes or any podcast catcher, also at popcorntheology.com. Born and raised in Maryland, and I'm calling in response to your prompt. You're asking for favorite PG-13 horror movies. I don't know if this qualifies as horror, but I gotta say, it's definitely Signs. M. Night Shyamalan, Signs. If you haven't watched it, it's amazing. And I definitely low-key sort of judge anyone that says they watched and did not love Signs, because it is an incredibly deep movie. It's not all about like this alien invasion and creepy crop circles and all this stuff. That's really just window dressing on this incredibly human and amazing story. If your listeners haven't checked it out, or maybe they did years ago and didn't enjoy it, I am low-key judging them, but they could go give it another shot. Watch it again. It's an amazing movie. All right, thanks. Later.
Well, Richard, I'm sorry to say that you're probably going to be low-key judging me after listening to this episode. I haven't seen Signs yet. I've seen one or two M. Night Shyamalan movies, and neither really worked for me. I just didn't connect with them. I know that there's a lot of affection and affinity for Signs. I've seen scenes from it. It's one of those movies I may have seen a long time ago. I just know bits and pieces of it. But it's definitely one I want to check out. So that's on my watch list. It just bumped up a little bit. So I wish I would have had time to watch it before this episode, but I look forward to checking it out. Okay, our next call actually comes in from Tony, and I'm going to play his back-to-back with James, who also called in, because they both bring up the same movie. So let's listen to what they have to say.
Hey, Eric. This is Tony from North Carolina. Concerning favorite PG-13 horror films, this was a tough one for me. I threw in it for a while. I think, to me, it's a good tie between The Ring and Insidious. The Ring, it's just, there's so many creepy factors to it, as well as straight suspense and horror. And with Insidious, James Wan, dang, so good. I mean, you look at him, he's got that going for him. He had Saw, The Conjuring, so many good things. All right, well, that's it.
Hey, this is James from the great state of Texas. I am calling to say that my favorite and what I consider the best PG-13 horror movie is not only the best PG-13 horror movie, but my favorite horror movie of all time, which is Insidious. I think everything that you want to find in a horror movie can be found here. It's got a great, believable family dynamic that completely endears you to the plot. You're invested in the actual story and what's going on. The acting is fantastic. There's great chemistry with the entire cast. And it's a great representation of the different kind of scares you can find. There are jump scares, but there's also a focus on mood, a focus on atmosphere. It builds tension. It uses a lot of really cool imagery. I think the first two acts are a great modern interpretation of like a haunted house or just general like ghost film. But it also shows in its last act that it's not just going to rely on tried and true genre cliches, and it kind of carves out its own thing and is able to be its own weird madness in the end. So from start to finish, I just think there's so much to love here. Thank you for taking my call.
Well, Tony and James, thank you so much for calling in as well. I didn't think anybody would call in when I put the number out, but I'm so happy to hear that some of you chose to. But yeah, as far as Insidious goes, I'm a huge James Wan fan, and I think Insidious is an excellent movie.
It's not the house that's haunted. It's your son.
It is in the shadows of The Conjuring for me, but I don't fault people for going to one entry of The Conjuring versus an entry of the Insidious movies more than the other, because both are expertly crafted movies. James Wan is one of the greatest horror filmmakers of this generation, and I believe of all time. I think he's going to be remembered fondly along George Romero's and Wes Craven's and John Carpenter's. I think he's a very talented filmmaker. I really love the parent-child relationships that are played on heavily in the Insidious movies. Even going into the latest movie, which was the Last Key, where Lin Shaye's character sort of adopts that, mothering persona, and it plays on her past and childhood. I think it's interesting that James Wan always anchors his films in this strong, family dynamic, and Insidious really works well in that regard. That's a series that I'd love to do an episode with you about, James. I know you have a podcast of your own. I'd love to do an episode talking just about the Insidious movies, because I think there's so much to go into. I love the mythology of the Further, and that's a universe that I would always love to find out more about. So
when I say now, you will open your eyes and you will be on the other side.
All right, and then our last call comes in from Reed, who's calling in from Southern California. So let's check out what Reed had to say.
Hi, this is Reed. I am calling from California, and the topic at hand is what is the best PG-13 movie and why? I'm going to give two brief answers. You'll understand why in a second. I think that the best horror film released as PG-13 is The Sixth Sense from 1999 by M. Night Shyamalan. It launched the career of a rather polarizing director, but someone who fans like myself are very rabid for his material. I think the script itself, however you feel about his work writ large, I think the script for Sixth Sense is brilliant, and I think it holds up even on repeat viewing, despite whether or not you know the ending and how that flavors the rest of it. I think it holds up even better when you do know the ending. So yeah, I consider that to be, it's creepy, it's effective, it's emotional, it's got every element to it in terms of it's got story structure, it works well, the performances are very strong, it's an exceptional film. So the best horror film I feel like that has been released as PG-13 is The Sixth Sense. My second answer is actually a film that was released as PG, but because it was released in 1975, I guarantee you if it were released more recently or today, it would be a PG-13 film. I doubt it would be R, but it would be a PG-13 film, and that is Steven Spielberg's landmark film, Jaws, the very first blockbuster. I consider it a horror film. I think that it totally qualifies in the creature feature category. Bruce the Shark is absolutely terrifying. I'm still scared to go into the water as a result, and I believe that the only reason Jaws was not released as PG-13 was because of the time that it was, but it is PG. So to go one step further, I think the greatest PG film, horror film that was released would be Steven Spielberg's Jaws. So those are my answers. Love the show. Thank you, Eric, for the opportunity to chat and chime in, and keep up the good work. Talk to you later. Bye.
Yeah, so that's actually the interesting kink in talking about the PG-13 topic, is that there's a lot of movies that came out maybe that were rated R or PG that I think if were released now would have been rated PG-13. So when you're talking about movies that are kind of more appropriate for general audiences, it's difficult to say, a PG-13 movie pre-1980s. Now, the main reason for that, and actually the only reason for that, is because the PG-13 rating did not exist until 1984 when Red Dawn, the Patrick Swayze action movie, came out. And it was that movie and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom that pushed the ratings board to come up with a new rating that landed in between PG and R. And so PG-13 movies didn't exist till 1984. And so when you're going to be talking about a lot of modern movies. Yeah, I think that's really interesting when you talk about Jaws. Jaws would, I think, well, I don't know. There's some gore in Jaws, but I think it's safe to say that that movie could have pulled off a PG-13 if it was released today. And then as far as your other choice, The Sixth Sense, that's another M. Night Shyamalan oversight for me. I haven't seen it yet. I know the twist. I know it's a great movie from all accounts, but it's just not a movie that I felt a pressure to see since I'm not a huge fan of Shyamalan's work thus far. But I am interested in checking it out. So yeah, that's great. I love all the movies that are mentioned. It added a couple to my watch list, with The Exorcism of Emily Rose being one that I actually sought out and watched before the episode. I was thankful for that opportunity. There's a couple more that have been released lately. If you're keeping track and looking for some recommendations, there's a couple films that really stand out to me. Again, if you listen to episode 1011, you know that I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies until pretty much the tail end of my high school career. And so I lived on movies like Disturbia and The Stepfather and Boogeyman and The Grudge because they slipped into that PG-13 category. Out of those, the one that had the biggest impact on me was definitely Disturbia.
How many other perfect little houses hide really twisted secrets? Wait a minute.
Down on the ground! Well, the man has been kidnapping and killing people. All right, that's it. Come on.
It's a miracle they didn't just take you away.
No one believes me. I know what I saw.
Now, Disturbia has been kind of mocked as a loose ripoff of Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, but I don't think that gives that movie enough credit. I think what they did with that film is actually really fascinating, and it's a premise that I think is really worked for all it's got. I mean, it's just an excellent movie. DJ Caruso did an excellent job directing this cast of kids to be the modern equivalent to me of what the Goonies or any of these teen groups would have been back in the day for people growing up in the 80s. Aaron Yu was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in a movie. Shia LaBeouf was excellent. Everyone that I knew that watched the movie at that age had a huge crush on Sarah Romer. It's genuinely scary. It still holds up. I've watched it recently. It plays on a lot of interesting topics. It's well directed. It's well shot. David Morse is absolutely terrifying in the movie as the villain. It's just a really solid film. I also think moving into newer territory, Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell was an interesting throwback to kind of his Evil Dead years.
On May 29th, even nice people can go to hell. From Sam Raimi, the director of Spider-Man, Drag Me to Hell, rated PG-13, May 29th.
It really fits hand in hand with, I think, Evil Dead 2. Again, it a lot of that just goes down to cast. Alison Lohman is wonderful in that movie. She's one of my favorite horror characters and actresses in horror history. She's so good in that role. Justin Long is wonderful as well. And just, again, some great visuals. It doesn't pull punches. It might not be overly gory, but it's not afraid to be scary. And I think that's something important when you're doing these movies. And then in addition to kind of those getting into the more comedic realm, you have the recent Happy Death Day, which I've talked about in previous episodes. You have The Final Girls, which I really just want to sound the horn about that movie.
Bloodbath is the granddaddy of all campsite slasher films. Max's mom plays Nancy, this shy girl next door.
Nice legs. What time they open?
It's cool you get to remember your mom this way.
At least I get to see her on the anniversary of her death, even if she is being chased by a psycho.
Guys, somebody's coming.
Hey, do you guys know the way to Camp Bluefinch?
Tina. So we're in the movie.
If you haven't seen The Final Girls, it is a wonderful comedy, kind of making fun of the Friday the 13th. It's really funny. There's one moment that had me laughing out loud. It's really good. Malin Ackerman and Taissa Farmiga have a wonderful relationship in it. That's very sweet and genuine, and I didn't expect it to really draw me in as emotionally as it did. And then, of course, there's the film Krampus that came out recently, which I think is severely underrated.
He is the shadow of St. Nicholas. Hold on to each other. Krampus is coming.
Some great creature effects, and that movie actually has some pretty gross creature moments, which I was surprised to see in a PG-13, but really good as well. And if I had to pick the best PG-13 movie to come out in recent years, it would have to be The Conjuring 2.
Between 1977 and 1979, the Hodgson family of Enfield, England, were the victims of a terrifying phenomenon. Their story became the most documented case in paranormal history.
James Wan upped the ante in every way possible after The Conjuring. Even though The Conjuring might be a better film, I think the level he took the demons to, the visuals to in Conjuring 2, and the relationship dynamic between Ed and Lorraine Warren is just perfect in this movie. I think that's just an excellent example of making a terrifying movie by really showing very little. I mean, there's creepy imagery, but you don't see much actual on-screen violence. Even though you feel like it's a traumatic experience watching the movie, it's very good. And The Crooked Man is one of the most creative. I think it's the closest we've gotten to like a Nightmare on Elm Street style sequence.
There was a crooked man, and he walks a crooked mile.
It's pretty amazing. So I highly recommend those movies. But anyway, I think those are a couple of great PG-13 horror movies. If you disagree or if you have one that you'd love to shout out, definitely go ahead and join the Gut Reactions Facebook group and bring up the discussion there. I'd love to hear you argue with what you disagree with, or if you want to affirm something that was said. or if you liked one of the phone calls and you'd like to mention it, all those folks are in the group. So keep the conversation going. Like us on Facebook, at Gut Reactions Pod for Twitter, at Gut Reactions for Instagram. And then also, I haven't asked in a while, but please, if you do enjoy the show, go on iTunes and take the time to leave a 5-star review. That really helps with rankings, and invite your friends to listen as well. I'd love to grow the audience and really get to know more horror fans that want to celebrate the genre together. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.